welcome to Literary Prospects, where we talk to authors and literary professionals about books, publishing, and the writing life. I'm Kelley Vick. I'm the host of the program, and in just a moment, it will be my pleasure to introduce today's guest. But first, a reminder that if you like what you hear, please do take a moment to subscribe. It helps us out, and you can make sure you never miss an episode. Also, we've opened a Literary Prospects shop, so if you're looking for bookish shirts, totes, and gifts, please check that out at literaryprospects.etsy.com. And to grab books featured on the podcast and check out more curated book lists, you can visit the Literary Prospects bookstore on bookshop.org. We'll leave all those links below in the show notes. And now, let's introduce today's guest. Chad Beguelin is a 6-time Tony Award nominee. His Broadway works include The Prom, Disney's Aladdin, Elf, and The Wedding Singer. Chad also co-wrote the screenplay for The Prom, currently available on Netflix. His debut novel, Showmance, is out now. Chad is a graduate of New York University's Tisch School of the Arts graduate dramatic writing program. He currently lives in Bridgehampton with his husband Tom and their dog Tucker. Chad Beguelin, thank you so much for being here today, and congratulations on your debut novel, Showmance.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. In a starred review, Publishers Weekly says, peppered with witty one-liners and many musical theater references, this charming, zippy romance hits all the right notes. Book Page says, truly entertaining with well-drawn characters and bouncy dialogue. The chemistry leads to a happy ending that readers, especially those who catch all the musical references, will grin over. Author Stephen Rowley says, no out-of-town tryouts needed here. Showmance is ready for the big time. Stage of Fools, the show within the novel, might open and close in one night, but Beguelin crafts a story you never want to end. Showmance thinks. And author Andrew Sean Greer says Showmance is the most fun you'll have off Broadway. The zingers fly, the romance sizzles, and the dialogue sparkles like the best Dom Perignon. A novel so charming, it somehow bursts into song. So with all of that, what can you tell us about Showmance?
Well, it's funny because I usually write Broadway musicals, and I sort of got excited about the idea of writing a novel and the the idea of taking people sort of behind the scenes of how writing a show and mounting it works. Seemed like it could be a lot of fun, but it's very funny because Noah's very, I've pulled stuff from my own life about Noah, but Noah's, I think I'm a better person hopefully than Noah because Noah has a very short fuse. He tends to explode. He's got it's a hairline trigger. But I wanted to sort of explore, this guy that comes from these small, humble beginnings, goes off to New York, and then comes back somewhat of a snob, and then, gets taken down a few notches.
What was the spark that really started this for you, that got you started?
Well, I've always wondered if I could write a book. It seems like a marathon because you write 5 good jokes in a musical, and you're done with the first scene. And you write 5 good jokes in a book, you're not even off the first page. So it was like, okay, this is going to be a huge, it's vastly different also in that you don't have collaborators. When you're writing a musical, you almost always have, at least director, choreographer, and then layering on actors, and then, a composer. And, I usually write with another book writer. So there are a lot of opinions, but there are also a lot of ways, people to test ideas on. So this was sort of just, it seemed daunting at first because it was, just me and my pokey little brain talking to myself a lot. But once I sort of started, I sort of found a groove, and then I couldn't stop. I was sort of obsessed with it and writing around the clock and waking up in the middle of the night and jotting things down on my phone and just constantly, my husband and I were on vacation with some friends, and I was like constantly writing stuff on my phone, and my friends would be like, would you like to look at this very expensive castle that we came all this way to. And I was like, yeah, 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 I just have this really good idea. So it really sort of, I became possessed by it in a way, but in a really good way. Yeah, and so I finally got a draft and I was like really scared to share it with my theatrical agent. So I sent it to him, and then 5 minutes later, I sent him a thing saying, "Don't read it. I'm going to rewrite it." And so I did this to him about 10 times. And so finally, I was like, he's like, "Okay, I'm going to read it, and then don't send me any more." And then he loved it. That it was great, and so he sort of spiked it over to the literary agents at my agency at CAA, and they were great. They helped me sort of whip it into shape, and they were sort of stunned how quickly I would turn around notes. But I was so starved for any kind of feedback that I was just thrilled. And then, once I actually sold the book, my editor, Marie Michaels, is amazing. But she was like, I've never worked with anybody that works this fast. And one time I had turned the notes around in like a day and a half. And I told myself,
Wow.
you got to wait till Monday because she's going to think you phoned it in. So just don't send her anything because you don't want to look like you're just, half-assing it. But yeah, so it's been so different from what I'm used to as far as, writing musicals go.
You mentioned obviously the similarity between yourself and Noah, our protagonist in Showmance, that you both work in Broadway. What are some of the other similarities?
Well, the mother character is very close to my own mother. Her name is
Good.
Nancy Day.
I'm so glad to hear.
Yeah,
Great.
I said, Mom, you're going to be the only one other than my husband Tom that's going to read it beforehand because if you want me to take your name off of it, I will. Her name is really Nancy K. And you read it. She's like, "Oh, I love her. She's great." And I was like, "Oh, okay, great." So she is the worst cook, and she's totally owns that. When we were kids, they called her the hot dog lady because you don't want to eat at our house unless she's making hot dogs. That's all she can make. If there's anything else, just leave. Um, and a lot of the community theater in my small hometown, was and still is really a really special place to me. And they, much like Noah, they let me direct and write things when I was as young as 15. They were just really supportive and like, yeah, you want to do it? Let's do it. So I I especially am doing they asked me to come back and do a book signing there, so I'm really looking forward to that because so many of the characters are sort of inspired by that place and those people.
Do you think it makes it easier or harder to write a character that you seem to have a lot in common with?
Um, I don't know. I mean, it's that old thing, right? What you know. So
Yeah.
I think I definitely, there are big differences in temperament for sure. I hope. God, I would be horrified if somebody was like, "You're just like Noah." But I wanted him to have somewhere to grow, and but it for me, I thought it was definitely easier. I think, some of the other characters were just sort of out of the blue and, trying to figure out what made them tick. And I especially wanted to be careful with the character of Luke because
Mm.
I didn't want him to be some sort of like, archetype or trope or, and, it could veer off that way. So I wanted to make sure that he had a real past and had some real issues to work through as well. So, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely it definitely helps that the guy is a playwright and I'm a playwright.
Speaking of working through issues from the past, you've said that you were drawn to writing about the concept that we don't always remember the past with 2020 vision. What do you mean by that? Can you talk about that a little bit?
I I think one of the things that sort of inspired the character of Luke, and to some extent that whole trajectory is there was this guy in when I was in grade school from like sixth grade through high school who just
Mm.
bullied me relentlessly, just constantly, and was threatening to beat me up and calling me all these horrible things in the hallways. And right when Facebook started happening, I got a friend request from him. And I thought, what? what if I've just remembered this completely wrong? You know, I was just so shocked. I was like, does this not, didn't that happen the way I thought it happened? And it did happen the way I thought it happened, but it did make me think, you know, what my perception of our non-relationship and what his is so completely extreme. Like he's, you know, he was the one person that I just wanted to like escape from, and now you know, it's like, hey, let's be friends. And probably has no memory of that at all. And I remember thinking, well, if he wants to look at my big gay life, sure. And so I accepted his friendship, and it's just been like, just nothing ever happened. And so I sort of started thinking about that in both directions, you know, remembering things that didn't happen, or remembering them from a different perspective, and what that, how that could work in the relationship between Noah and Luke.
Yeah. It's a story about finding connection. It's also about redemption. What draws you to writing about these themes?
It's funny. I always think about the relationship with Noah and his father, um, because it's very distant and it's very unemotional, and it's, that character is sort of an amalgam of my father and my stepfather, neither of which are with us anymore. But when when I was a kid, when I was, I think, in third or fourth grade, my mom remarried, and she married the high school basketball coach. And I was tap dancing in my room and singing show tunes. And so we did not uh, gel well at all. So it was really a strained relationship. And then when I was in my 30s, I got a call from him out of the blue. And he said, you know, I've just been thinking about some stuff. And I think, you know, I wasn't always very kind to you growing up. And I just wanted to apologize. And I think, you know, you were much nicer to me than I was to you. And you were the kid in the situation. And I just want to say I'm sorry.
Hmm.
And that just blew my mind. And especially, like, he's really a man's man, or he was, and, you know, very, very macho, and very not a guy to talk about feelings. And that just really struck me, because I thought, you know, I always sort of had that feeling of, oh, people don't really change. And then it just was like a complete, you know, turnaround. And so, and then our relationship was great. Um, so I sort of was so moved by that in my own life that I wanted to put that in the novel, but also, you know, have bits of it for sort of all the characters have a little bit of a sort of a revelation, and, you know, a redemption of some sort.
Yeah. Why are romantic comedies important?
I think for me, it's sort of about learning, watching two people grow, and sort of how they sort of affect each other, and hopefully change each other for the better. And I think, you know, we, well, I always want a happy ending. I want, you know, something, the world is, we know, is hard enough. It's hard enough out there.
Mhm.
So, you know, that's why, another reason I'm a big fan, because I think it's funny. I, of course, I'm blanking on her name, but I uh, was reading some post about romantic comedies, and she was like, don't ignore the tropes, embrace the tropes, we want the tropes. And I was like, thought that was so funny, and I was like, what are the tropes? So I started reading it. I was like, oh good, I did that, okay. um but I think there's something comforting in them, and I think there's something, like I said, you know, sort of positive in a world that we have so much negativity thrown at us.
Yeah. One thing that struck me, maybe speaking of a little bit of negativity or at least stress, while I was reading Showmance, right there on page one is the amount of pressure that authors of Broadway shows are under. There are a lot of people's jobs. You kind of talked about this a little bit earlier. There's a lot of people's jobs writing on whether or not the show does well. Can you talk about that a little bit and what you do to handle that pressure?
Yeah, I mean, it is so funny, because you are expected to pose for pictures and do tape interviews, and you're smiling, and deep down you're going, "Oh my God, any minute now, the New York Times review could come out and kill us." And it's for me, it's I I try and enjoy the night as much as I can and tell myself, oh, it doesn't matter, but it ultimately does matter. So it's
Mhm.
just business, it's show business. And you know, I've had both sides of the coin. My first musical was The Wedding Singer, and you know, we're at the opening night party, and the New York Times didn't like it. And all of a sudden, everybody got kind of quiet, and people start leaving. It's just terrible, and you just have this feeling like I failed all these people, and we ended up running, you know, uh, much longer than I thought we would. We were afraid they were just going to close, which happens sometimes. Um, but it was awful, and it feels so public and like you know, and of course it's collaboration. It's not just one person, but you feel the weight of it all, and yeah, it's terrible. And then for Aladdin, we had our out of town in Toronto and got killed in Toronto, just torn to shreds, everything, everybody, everything. And so before we came to Broadway, we had 3 months and we revamped everything. We just like worked until we were, you know, half dead to like change and make it work. And so that opening night party, I went and I was just expecting it to be bad. And I was just telling myself, you did every single thing you could. Like, it's just, that's all you can do. And then all of a sudden, there was this huge cheer from the dance floor. And I looked around, and Alan Menken, who wrote the score, his agent ran up to me and he grabbed me and he's like, "It's a rave." And I was just like, "Oh my God, I've never had this experience before." Like, it's the actual happy opening night. It's so weird. So it is. It's this pressure cooker where you're, you know, just like praying to the theater gods that, you know, it doesn't get completely destroyed in a matter of minutes.
Is there any sort of ritual that you have or any specific thing that you do to try to keep yourself calm in
Not
those moments?
not really. I mean, you are really super busy because they're having you do press and they're having you do,
Yeah.
you know, the red carpet, and so you're sort of just, you know, trying to stay distracted with that and trying to, you know, answer the interviewer's questions without looking like you're about to explode to a million pieces.
You've written for Broadway for a long time. Your Broadway works include The Prom, Aladdin, Elf, The Wedding Singer. You're a six-time Tony Award nominee.
Always a bridesmaid.
Can you talk about how you got your start in writing for Broadway?
It's really one of those things where not getting what you want can sometimes be a good thing. I had written this show called The Rhythm Club with my collaborator Matthew Sklar, and it had gone up at the Signature Theater in Arlington, Virginia, and we already had uh, our theater on Broadway was then called the Virginia Theater. We already had our poster up in Schubert Alley, and we opened in Virginia, and the Washington Post killed it. So the investors took out their money, and the show was dead in the water. Um, so that was devastating.
Mhm.
And I was at the time, a few years later, I was pitching screenplays, and I walked into New Line Cinema, and I was pitching. I eventually sold it, but it was a children's movie called Frankenteacher, uh, which I was pitching to this guy Mark Kaufman, and I could tell he just had no interest. He thought it was a bad idea, and I was just like, "Oh, this is going terribly." And he said, "Your name seems very familiar." And I said, "Well, I do write musicals. I wrote this thing called the Rhythm Club." And he said, "Stop talking." And he pulled out from his desk the Rhythm Club demo that had been sent around to investors. He was like, "I love this. I love this." And they had just done the Broadway version of Hairspray. And he's like, "We're getting into writing, you know, producing our movies as musicals. Would you be interested?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's my first love." And so he hired Matthew and me to write The Wedding Singer. So it was one of those things where I thought, you know, this horrible, you know, painful thing happened, but just that one little demo getting to this one desk in New Line, you know, got us our, you know, first Broadway show. So I try to remember that whenever something disappointing happens. I'm like, there's got to be a reason. There's got to be some reason that this is happening.
Well, speaking of screenwriting, The Prom was adapted for the screen by
Yes.
Netflix, which you worked on. What was that process like?
It was really fast. It was so fast. Ryan wanted to do it. He came to see the show. Well, first of all, we didn't know he was interested at all. We didn't even know he'd seen the show. And then all of a sudden, these big stars like Meryl Streep and Nicole Kidman are showing up in the audience. We're like, what is going on? And so then we found out he wanted to do it. And so we really quickly, Bob Martin, who I co-wrote the script with, wrote the screenplay, and then we would be sort of on deck, and he would call, like, say, Sunday night at 8 o'clock and be like, get us both on the phone and be like, I want to do a scene with Meryl on the bus going down to the school, and I want give Nicole Kidman a joke and get it to me by tomorrow midday. So it was just like working really, really, really fast. And then, actually going to the set and meeting the actors was completely surreal. At one point, Meryl Streep was talking to me and she put her hand on me and I completely blanked out because I was just thinking, Meryl Streep is touching my arm. I was like, what? You said what now? But yeah, it was completely surreal because we never saw that coming at all. So it was very, very fun.
And that movie, The Prom, was also a #1 movie in Russia for a time, which was a huge deal. Can you talk
Yes,
about that a bit?
it's funny when Ryan was talking to us, we had uh, just found out that he wanted to do the movie, and he said one of the reasons I want to do this is because of all of these horrible anti-gay laws that are happening, and he's like, I want a kid in Russia to be able to see this movie and to feel seen. And that sort of like sealed the deal for the writing team. We were like, that would be amazing. So yeah, the fact that it got to #1 was really, really heartening because that was sort of the thing that like cemented the deal. When he said that, we were like, admirable and wonderful, and yes, let's go.
Wonderful. What made you make that leap? You said that you'd been wanting to try a novel. What made you make that leap now?
It's funny, the writing Broadway musicals, it's usually like takes 7 years or so. That seems to be
Mhm.
the number. And it's not the writing, it's the waiting. It's the waiting for a director, and then it's waiting for actors, and then it's waiting for the right size theater that makes economic sense. And there's just all of this waiting. And I realized, if I wanted to write a novel, it's all up to me. I can go as fast as I want. I don't have to wait on anybody. And I think that's another reason I wrote it so fast because it was so freeing to just be like, when it's done, it goes out. There's no waiting for the next season to show up or, waiting for a star to get, to say yes to the project. Um, and I also was really sort of excited about taking people inside Noah's mind and being sort of inside his thoughts while he's, getting his heart broken and putting his foot in his mouth and has everything wrong. He's wrong about everything, and learning how to be a slightly better person and, having this reconnection with his father. And I when you do any sort of theater or movie or film, somebody is going to uh, put their spin on it. The
Mhm.
director is, and then the actor is going to have, their angle on the character. And it sort of was exciting to me to sort of, there are no more middle people. You're just talking
Yeah.
directly to your audience. So that was sort of exciting as well.
How was your process different in writing the novel than you find that your process is when you're writing for stage or screen? You sort of mentioned that they all can move quickly in different ways. You tend to work very quickly, but do you find that you're working differently in the different genres yourself when you're there at your desk?
Yeah, I mean, especially different with say lyric writing. Lyric
Mm.
writing, I always think of as like trying to build a ship inside a bottle. There's no space. There's so little real estate, and every single word counts. And it's got to rhyme, and it's got to be a surprising rhyme. It can't be an expected rhyme, and it's got to, there are all these. So when I was reading or when I was writing the novel, it just felt so freeing because it was sort of like there aren't really any rules, and you can just sort of go for it. So I think that was the big thing. And then I found myself also, talking to myself constantly and sort of because there's no one else to cheerlead you. So I would say I would get frustrated and say, "You're exactly where you need to be, and that's okay." I talk to myself like I was a little kid, because there is, my collaborators and I were very, very supportive, and we're like, "That's a great joke," or "That's a great song," or "Good work today,"
Mm.
So I realized, oh, you're going to have to sort of cheerlead yourself throughout this because nobody's going to be doing that along the way. And and then for me, the sort of note process is completely different. In the theater, you get your notes from usually the director. The producers are supposed to funnel the notes to the director. Sometimes they come right up to you and give them to you.
Mhm.
Um, but they are usually very, very specific and find a way to make it work. Whereas when I was doing, going through line edits and stuff, one of my literary agents said, you don't have to take every single note. This is your book. And which is very different from, say, when I was doing Aladdin, and it was like the producer was like, okay, after we do the number Friend Like Me, you've got a minute and a half of dialogue until we need to get to intermission because nobody's going to want to sit through it. And I was like, a minute and a half? He's got to transform into a totally different person. They're like, okay, we'll give you a minute and 45. But, it's totally different in, the sort of feeling of, no, this is your book. And if you agree with these notes, great. Or if you can find a compromise, great. Which is, in the theater, especially Broadway, with millions and millions of dollars at stake. People, especially the ones that are writing the check, have very, very strong opinions about what works and what doesn't work. And so it's sort of, in the theater, I'm always trying to please everybody and make it, make an outcome that'll make everybody happy. Whereas it felt very sort of different with this because it was sort of my idea. I was the only writer on it. That said, I thought all of the notes were amazing. There was only one note that I thought, and I talked, got on the phone with my editor, and we found a solution. But it's been, knock on wood, it's been such a positive experience.
Are you working on another novel?
I have an idea, and I started working on it. And some people have asked, is there, you're thinking about a sequel because it sort of, ends like that. But I don't know. I guess we'll see how this one does. I'm sort of hesitant to throw a monkey wrench into the happy ending. But I just read The Guncle Abroad, which I absolutely love, and I love how he talks about writing sequels while he's actually writing a sequel. He's like, you have to make up problems, and these relationships that were fine, you have to, So I sort of feel like that. But yeah, I mean, it's I'm starting. I have an idea, and I'm starting to play around with it. And what I did with Showmance was I wrote a couple of chapters, and then I put it away, and then I
Hmm.
came back to it about a couple months later, and I suddenly was like, "Oh, I know how this goes. I know how." Like for some reason, just stepping away from it for a little bit, I guess my subconscious mind was working on it, and I didn't know. So I was suddenly
Wow.
like, "Oh, I see the through line for this."
Have you always been a writer?
Yeah, well, strangely enough, I originally went to college. I went to NYU for acting, and I don't know how I got in because I'm a terrible actor. And somehow I got in. And while I was there, I took an extra class in playwriting. And my teacher at the time, the TA that was teaching the class, was like, "You should be doing this. You should be writing." And convinced me to get a double major in dramatic writing. And then I actually stayed and got my master's in dramatic writing. And so that teacher that changed my entire life went on to become Pulitzer Prize winner Doug Wright.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, not too shabby. But he was just like, you should be doing this. You're really good at this. And thank God, because I was a terrible actor. So I knew I wanted to be involved in the theater somehow, but I was banging on the wrong door.
What do you find do you have a daily sort of writing routine?
No. I used to do that. I used to try and do that, and it just doesn't work for me. I end up getting really frustrated and banging my head into the laptop. So I jokingly said, somebody asked me this the other day, and I said, it kind of feels like when you, it's disgusting, but it kind of feels like when you know when you're going to throw up. It's sort of like I can feel it coming in the air, and I'm like, Oh, okay, now, okay, yeah, 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 now. And then the flip side of that is that, sometimes it'll be 3 in the morning and I'll wake up and I'll be like, now, I've got it, I've got to go, I've got it. Yeah, I know there are writers that believe in doing that and have a set schedule and that's their time to write. But it's just never worked for me. I always end up getting frustrated. So it's sort of like go fold laundry or something, and then something will hit me. But yeah, I think for some reason I can't, unless I have a deadline. Obviously, then there's absolutely no choice. Then I have to. But at least with this novel, especially with songs too. We'll talk about a song and I'll think about it, and then all of a sudden I'll be like, oh, here's the song. So it's always doesn't always happen that easily, but it's great when it does.
What do you know now that you wish you had known as you started this journey of publishing your first novel?
Um, I think my sort of fear was like, oh, what if I can't get it published? What will that be? What will that look like? And will I be disappointed? And and so I would it's corny, but I would do things like I would imagine myself like holding a finished novel and being like, it's done, when I was halfway through and going, is this even going to work? So I wish I would have known to have been a little more, had a little more belief, because I had so many, doubts and fears. And then when it actually, it's funny when my husband and I were we have Peloton bikes, so we were spinning. And just as I was getting on the bike, I picked up my phone and I saw the email that we'd sold the book. And so we were like hugging, and Tom, my husband's like, let's go out to lunch, let's celebrate. And I'm like, yeah, yeah. And so I get in the shower, and this is how big the imposter syndrome was. I convinced myself that my husband, Tom, behind my back, had given the agents the option money to give to me to make me think that I'd sold a book. And I came down and I accused him of this. And he was like,
There's a book.
yeah, I know. He was like, that is the craziest thing you've ever said to me. And we've been together 30 years. And that is the craziest thing you've ever said. And he was like, well, what do I do then? Now do I have to like pay for all these books to be printed up and stuck in bookstores somehow? And I was like, okay, I'm crazy. But, it was just, I wish I would have had more belief in myself, because I think there were so many times that I was just so worried that nothing would come from it.
Do you have advice for aspiring authors?
Yes. I mean, the best advice I ever got was, it's got to be bad before it can be good.
What's great?
And it's so, because I'll write something and I'll think it's brilliant and I'll be so proud of myself. I'll go to sleep and I'll wake up and I'll read it and I'll be like, this is garbage. So that's the moment you become a writer. That's when you look at it and you go, oh God, this is what I thought it was. Now let's see how can I improve it? How can I make it better? But it's got to start out bad. It doesn't just come fully formed to you. And it's funny, I was working with the director of Kinky Boots on a project, and Cyndi Lauper came in, and I'm a huge Cyndi Lauper fan.
Mm.
And they were talking about this musical that had just opened. It got panned, and she was asking him what went wrong, and he said, "Well, I just don't think the score's very good. The songs aren't very good." And she said, "Well, why didn't they write it better? Why didn't they write it better?" And I remember just laughing and then thinking, that's a good thing to remind myself when, like, just sit down and I think it's awful. I'll just say to myself in my Cyndi Lauper voice, write it better. It's like, come on, don't sit around, don't mope around, like fix it. But yeah, that's always helpful, because those moments happen all the time where you go back and you read what you've written and you go, oh my God, I thought this was so much better. And then you go, okay, well, let's figure it out.
I'm always going to hear Cyndi Lauper in my head now.
It also shows how talented she is, because
Yeah.
she could just write it better.
Just do it better.
Yeah, that's not so hard.
We have a traditional last question on this podcast, and I think it's pretty great for this situation. When Showmance is made into a movie or series, what do you think the theme song should be?
Oh, I think it should be More Than Love Can Hold. I think it should be an original song with those lyrics written by Elton John.
Excellent.
Perfect.
Perfect. Chad Beguelin, thank you so much for joining today. It
Thanks
has
for having
really
me.
been a pleasure getting the chance to talk to you.
Thanks so much. This has been great.
Thanks for joining us on Literary Prospects. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. We'll see you next time.